My name is Geoffrey Stern, and at Madlik, we like to light a spark or shed some light on a Jewish text or tradition. This week, we offer a live recording of our weekly Friday at 4 Madlik Disruptive Torah. I'm joined by Rabbi Adam Mintz as we discuss the relative importance of the Jewish home and envision how that role can grow after COVID. So settle back in your favorite chair and join us as we present Home Alone No More. Okay, well, let's get started. Last week, we discussed, imagined, and strategized a little bit about what the temple, or synagogue, or shuls might look like after COVID. And we've been given a year to kind of refresh our lenses, clean our glasses, and think about it. And there's a very strong tradition that most of you should be aware of, that the home is called Mishkan Ma'at, a small temple. And there are many customs revolving around that concept, whether it's using salt on the challah or covering the knife. These are all, when you ask, why do you do that? Many times the answer is, well, this was done in the temple, on the mizbeach, on the altar. And today we don't have a temple and we don't have an altar. And we do some of these things at home because our home is a small analog for the temple. But I would like to explore today, number one, where that concept may have come from, and to question whether either chronologically or in terms of priority, the analog is that the home is a small comparison of the temple, or possibly the temple is an analog of the home. And we're going to embark on our journey from this week's Parsha, where we learn about what is commonly called as leprosy, but scholars debate exactly what the type of disease we're talking, but as it relates to a house, not a body. And the Bible in Leviticus chapter 14, maybe the best symmetry that we can think of is when a house gets mold. But in any case, the priest gets called to come look at a house that has some sort of disease, and all the furniture is taken out. And like a human being who gets impure, there's a waiting period, there's a cleansing period, and things are taken outside of the city. And then ultimately, we hear of the priest coming to the house, to the Petach Habayit, to the doorpost, the frame of the door, and making an inspection and making it a determination. And when finally the house is considered to be pure, the priest does something rather interesting. He comes and he takes two birds. And he slaughters one bird, and he uses the blood to do a ritual purification of the house. But the second bird he sets free outside of the city in the open country. And there, chiper al habayit v'taher. It makes the house clean and holy. And for those of you who know your Bible and know your Jewish traditions, this has to ring a big bell. And the big bell that I'm talking about is the ceremony held on the holiest day of the year on Yom Kippur, where the high priest, takes two goats, slaughters one, and sends the other goat to the wilderness to Azazel. Of course, that ceremony is done at the Petach Habayit of the temple or the Mishkan, and this is done at somebody's personal home. So I want to begin the discussion by saying, number one, what does this synergy or symmetry say to us about the relative standing and merits of the two? And is it a source, in fact, for this concept that the house is a temple? And I'll open that up for discussion.
So Geoffrey, I think you've identified a very important point. Before I answer your question, I want to pick it up one level to say that in addition to the two birds, what the Kohen takes is he takes hyssop, and he takes a cedar branch, and he takes a crimson piece of wool. And actually, the only other place in the Torah where we see this combination of hyssop, cedar, and crimson is actually in the story of the Para Aduma, in the story where if you become ritually impure because you touch a dead body, you need to be sprinkled with the ashes of the red heifer. And therefore, what we really see is that there are a couple of places, when you think about it, Geoffrey, I think it's been fascinating, that, most of the things in the temple were kind of quiet, kind of under the radar. They weren't big into drama. There were only a few times where they were big into drama. Yom Kippur, they were big into drama. Here with Sarat, they were big into drama. And the idea of the Para Aduma, the idea of the red heifer, which was so difficult to come by, they also were into drama. And I think the idea is, I think your point is right. I think the reason that the Torah is what I call into drama is because the Torah wants to make a very important point about these ritual processes. And the way to do it is by making them very dramatic. It's like choreographing them. Everybody is aware of them. And Yom Kippur is like the idea of Sarat, the idea of leprosy, in that we take Sarat is of the individual and Yom Kippur is of the community. And I think that's a very important point. Now, you said it's the temple versus the home. I wonder what you think if we just rephrase that as the individual versus the community.
That's a willing comparison, and I think I'm willing to accept it. I love the concept that you're bringing drama into this. I think of almost when we open up the door to Elijah. That's clearly a dramatic moment. But what it is doing is making the Petach HaBayit as dramatic, whether it's in your personal individual home or if it's in the holy temple. I can, clearly, it says I'm thinking of Exodus 29, where it says, at the entrance of the tent of meeting before the Lord, for there I will meet with you, and there I will speak with you, and there I will meet with the Israelites, and it shall be sanctified by my presence. The Petach HaOhel, the door of the temple, is a very dramatic space. And what we are saying, if I can combine all of your thoughts together, is that in an individual level, the entrance to the home is just as dramatic and powerful. And so I think from that, if our discussion is going to a question of what role does the home play in the continuation of Judaism, I think at this point I would like to venture and say it's on par. But I'd like to raise the stakes, because I think when we think about the petach to the home, the entrance to the home, we can't but think of the Exodus from Egypt. We can't but think of when the night of Shmurim, the night that the Jews left Egypt, it says they shall take some of the blood and put it on the two doorposts and the lintel of the houses where they are to eat. So in terms of chronology, I would even argue that the house as that dramatic place of finding God's presence preceded the temple. And so I am going to make an argument today, or at least invite us to think in terms of whether it's the continuity of Judaism, whether it's where we get our strength and sustenance and inspiration, that home is on par, if not even a prequel of the temple and the Mishkan.
I like that. I like that a lot, and that is that it's the home that you need a home before you can have a Mishkan. You can't have a Mishkan. You can't have a holy home before you know what it's like to have a personal home.
Great.
What do you think about that formulation? Meaning that we learn about holiness from a personal experience. You can't have holiness just like that. Holiness comes from knowing how to deal with human beings.
I think what you're saying is almost from an educational point of view. You learn the macro from the micro, so to speak. I know there's a phrase, ontology recapitulates. I forget what the other side of it is. But what you're saying is that there's a lot to learn from the home that we can extrapolate to the bigger picture. And I think that's a very valid point. But again, I want to get back to my premise that the two have equal footing. The next example that I'd like to give is every time we walk into a synagogue, probably the verse that we see more than not over the Aron HaKodesh, place where the Torah scrolls are held, is Ma Tovu Ohalecha Yaakov, how goodly are the tents of Jacob. And it's so funny that it's in a synagogue because there is no question that there is this, I'd say, dialogue or in dialectic between whether it refers to the tents of the children of Israel, meaning their homes, or whether it refers to some sort of temple. If you look at the Rashi on that verse, he gives two interpretations. The first one is, he says, you know what? Bilam was looking at the tents of Israel, and he saw that the opening of every tent was not facing another opening, that the Jews, by their very disposition of the tents, characterize this sense of tzniut, of modesty. And then he says the second interpretation is it refers to how goodly are the tents of Shiloh and the temple. So again, it's this almost equality between the two. And that fascinates me, and that I think is a wonderful point of a larger discussion that we should have, which is here, while unlike the synagogue where we haven't been able to visit, in terms of our homes, we've been cooped up. We've been home alone, so to speak. And we haven't been able to invite over the guests for Shabbat. And we might not have been able to have our children over for the type of intellectual and spiritual dialogue that we have every Friday night. And I just think this is an opportunity to really look at how the institution of the Jewish home needs to be also revisited. Just as we revisited the synagogue last week, how do we, number one, ensure that the Jewish home thrives in this new age, whether it's modernity in general or whatever? I'd love your thoughts on that. Roy, do you have some thoughts on this subject?
One thing that came to mind just as you were equating or sharing the equivalence of a home and the temple or the tabernacle is the words themselves. Just to go back to that point, that's what I was thinking about. Mishkan has the root shochein in it. That's the root of the word, and shochein means to live, to dwell. Literally, it's because it's God's dwelling place, where God is going to dwell among the Jewish people. But it sounds, it still has that same root as to live, which you live at home, and there's living, you dwell in the temple. And the same thing is true for the temple, for the Beit HaMikdash. The word Beit is in there, house of the Beit HaMikdash, the house of sanctity, literally. So we can't get away from, even just in the words themselves, equating the sanctity of the home and the sanctity of the temple, and showing their relationship.
I couldn't agree more. I love the fact that we refer to the Temple Mount as the Har Habayit. It's the mountain of the house, of the home. The tefillin that we put on our arm and on our forehead are called batim, and they look like batim a little bit. So I'm really with you. And the language of shekhinah, of shochen, of neighbor, letting in God, letting in man is so powerful. But
I would just, Geoffrey, going back to your question, and Rabbi Roy's point was really a good point, but the idea of rethinking or recalibrating or the home is really a super interesting idea. It just so happens that that next week I'm going to be sitting Shiva. And, I mention that only because Shiva is really it might be the only ritual that we have in all of Jewish ritual in which it takes place at home, but we invite people to our home. There's no ritual without inviting people to our home. Meaning Shabbat meal, you can have guests. You don't have to have guests, but it's Shabbos even if you don't have guests. But it's not Shiva if you don't have guests. Shiva means that you open up your home. And what we found is that next week when we plan our Shiva is that we can't have it at home because there still are COVID restrictions. And therefore, to open up our home would be in violation of the COVID restrictions. And therefore, we have to have the Shiva outdoors where people can come. And I really found that very striking that COVID doesn't allow us to open up our homes. The one thing that Shiva tells you to do is open up your home, and we're not allowed to open up our home.
Yeah, that is amazing. I mean, there's one interview that really strikes me. It's a Charlie Rose interview of the Emmanuel brothers, the three Emmanuel brothers. One was a great doctor. The other is a great healthcare expert, and Rahm Emanuel was at the time working under President Obama. And he asked, how did one family achieve such distinction in terms of their careers and everything else? And Ram, or one of them, said it was Friday night dinner. You had to show up with your A game. There were guests there. And you talked, Rabbi, a second ago about the fact that my father and your father both passed away at 93. My dad's Friday night table was full of intellectual artists, all sorts of types of people. Getting back to what you were saying about inviting in people as you do for a Shiva. And I just think that, many of our institutions, our synagogues, they'll go in the direction of having a Passover Seder, a communal Passover Seder, or trying to get people to experience Shabbat by having the meal at the synagogue. And I get it, and I understand why they have to do it. But I'm also thinking about programming that we can do where people are taught and encouraged to have that experience in the bayit. My local Chabad synagogue normally had cooked-in meals, and they have these amazing kitchen. Now they're doing takeout, so to speak. And if you think about that, that is helping people celebrate Friday night at home. And I don't think that there is anything that compares to the experience of a Friday night dinner. And so those are the kinds of things that I'm kind of looking for. And I just invited my good friend Elise up, and I celebrate many Friday night dinners with Elise. Hi, Elise.
Don't wait. We're so blessed to do that. it's so interesting that I just got a package from Brown University Hillel that was a package that because students can't go to Hillel for Shabbat dinners, they started a whole Shabbat to go program. And tonight, 700 Brown students are hosting each other at Shabbat dinners with kosher meals that were provided by Hillel, with everything that you need to make Shabbat, and a card of very insightful questions to spur conversation.
It's amazing. And I think, again, these, you prefaced your remarks by saying that because of COVID, they can't get together. But I'd like to think in terms of, if we were thinking programmatically, how can we use all of the tools at our disposal to strengthen the home, to strengthen Judaism in the home? Because I speak frankly from my own perspective. I think that my kids and myself and my parents have been more affected by the rich home Jewish environment that has been created for me and that I'm trying to create than any institution such as a synagogue.
Yeah, it's true. That's what we have to do. That's how we're going to move forward.
Geoffrey, I have a question, if I can leech onto my wife's clubhouse entrance.
Yes, Henry.
Hi. I have this is a pop question. I just having finished Stiesel, and you watch that, and like every 2 seconds, people are walking in and out of rooms, kissing the mezuzah. And I'm wondering, is that just done traditionally because the mother and the father and the grandparents did it? Or are they feeling some sort of holiness that they're entering their home, and this is the way to express it? Okay, that's it.
It's a very good question. Let me just chime in for a minute. The simple answer to your question is that a kibbutz shtisel touches the mezuzah every time he walks in and out, because that's the way he was brought up, or at least that's what shtisel tries to give you. It is interesting that Rambam, Maimonides, says that you're supposed to touch articles that are a mitzvah to remind you of the importance of the mitzvah. That's why he says, for people who put on tefillin in the morning, that when we daven, we're supposed to touch our tefillin. That's why when you get called to the Torah, you touch the Torah with your talit. That you're supposed to touch articles of mitzvah. Now, I think you're really bringing up something that's a little different than what Geoffrey brought up. But Geoffrey, it's an interesting idea. The idea that we need to touch articles of mitzvah. We need to make them ours by touching them. Elise talked about giving out 700 meals. Elise, the key in that is that you get something from Brown, and that allows you to participate. There's something real. In a way, the 700 meals tonight are a ritual. They become ritual. And I think, Geoffrey, what we really need to think about is, when we want to rethink the home as the spiritual center, is how we can turn things that have not been ritual into rituals. I think that's really a challenge. What can we make? In shul, I know what the ritual is. I know the Torah. I know the Siddur. I know the Talit. But at home, how can we turn everyday things into rituals?
I think that's a great question. I mean, I have to say, Henry, that reading the text that I did today, my answer would be that this petach ha'ohel, this opening to the house that mezuzah is on, is so powerful. It represents everything that we've been talking about. And maybe that's why it gets kissed so much. In terms of, I think also to the servant who doesn't want to go free, and his ear has to be pierced at the same lentil, at the same petach ha'ohel, because the Midrash says the ear that heard the Torah, that only God is our God, now wants to accept a human master. But I do think it's a question of tactility, of touching. I agree with you, Rabbi. But I also think that this opening to the home is so critical. In terms of where we can go from here, I think, the idea of cooking, which is such an important part of everybody's lives. It's growing, nutrition, what you eat. There's so much potential there for making that a Jewish ritual. I think that one of the subjects that I really want to get to before we finish up today is this whole question of an Eruv. In other words, those of you who know what an Eruv is, there's a law that you can't carry from a public domain to a private domain or vice versa. And the rabbis have a whole tractate just dealing with, excuse me for saying, for a loophole, for how you can get around it, how you can make symbolic joints between those things to enable people to socialize. And I think what the rabbis were saying is part and parcel of Judaism, of this celebration in the home, is socializing. And they could not accept a Shabbat where maybe like the Essenes, you sat in the dark at home. The concept of an Eruv, and it's so funny, it obviously affects urban areas more. And if you look, when you listen to the Torah tomorrow, and you listen to the Kohen standing in the house, where does he take all of the impure stones? Outside of the city, as if in the desert they were in a city. But clearly the text foresees an urban environment where people need to interact. And that too, I think, can be made into a Jewish mitzvah. Rabbi, could you talk a little bit about Eruv?
I sure can. So the word Eruv means to combine or join together. And there's no question that the purpose of Eruv was to bring members of the community together, to allow them to enjoy Shabbat together. I'll just jump to 100 years ago. In Eastern Europe, the reason they used to have an Eruv in every community is that people didn't have ovens or stoves that were hot enough or worked well enough to keep the cholent hot. So people used to keep the cholent hot by putting the cholent in the baker's oven. The problem is that you had to go retrieve the cholent on Shabbat morning when you were ready to have lunch. And therefore, they needed an Eruv to allow people to carry the cholent through the street so that they could enjoy the Shabbat lunch. So even food, Geoffrey, we talked about touching. We talked about eating. Now we with the Eruv. Isn't it amazing that it's the food that leads to the need to have an Eruv? Today, I would say there's no question that the main purpose of the Eruv is to allow kids to go outside on Shabbat. Whether it's pushing a baby carriage or to allow them to play in the park, it's children. But it's the same thing. If we want to sanctify the family, we need to be able to have an Eruv. We need to, in a sense, extend the house to the backyard, to the park, to allow people to enjoy Shabbat more fully.
I mean, as I'm listening to you, I'm thinking of, sometimes last week we said, does you go to shul to talk to God, or do you go to shul to talk to the guy next to you? And now this week I'm thinking, do you go to shul to enjoy the walk or getting there, or meeting your buddy and talking to them on the way? Or, I think there are so many aspects of the Jewish home and how it interacts and in our lives that can be, I wouldn't say ritualized, but certainly sanctified and taken. It's not even it is recreating, because it's all there. And I think that in the months ahead, as we open up the home, we have to look at the Jewish home again with fresh eyes. And I'll only conclude by saying there's a wonderful word that comes up in the blessings under the chuppah, but also in what we say to a couple. We wish them that they will build build a Bayit Ne'eman b'Yisrael. And a Bayit Ne'eman, you could say it's a faithful house. I think the better explanation is it's an enduring house. And I do think that the secret to the endurance of the Jewish people is ultimately with the house that we've been speaking about today. And on that, Rabbi, I want to wish you Hamakom Yinachem Otcha B'toch Sha'ar Avei Yerushalayim, that the spirit of your dad and continues to inspire you. I want to thank you from the bottom of my heart for being with us today. It means so much. I didn't expect in my wildest dreams that you would be here, but I wish you only the best, and Shabbat Shalom to everyone here.
Thank you, Geoffrey. Thank you, everybody. Shabbat Shalom. And may we share happy occasions together for a long, long time. Be well. Shabbat Shalom, everybody.
Amen.